Hi. So maybe you've heard about the fact that there are going to be changes or there have been changes announced to the Canadian immigration system. But what changed? Well, nothing really. Well, nothing major. But no change is a change. No change means something. In today's video, we're going to break down the changes that have been announced over the last 2 days. That's October 31st and November the 1st. And what do those changes mean for you? And what does the no change mean for you? Now, over the last several years, we have seen where each year they have increased the immigration targets. So each year they are welcoming more and more people to Canada. And last year was a record over 400,000, close to 500,000 people. And this year they are hitting the same or similar targets of between 400 and 500,000 people. And I think it's probably going to go above 500,000 people. Now, when they announced the last immigration targets, they said that, okay, so in 2024, they're going to welcome so many, 2025, they're going to welcome so many, and then they kind of just stopped at 2025 the last time they made announcements. So this time now they've included 2026. And what they've done is that, okay, 485,000 is their median target for the year of 2024, 485,000 people total. For 2025, it's going to be 500,000 people total. And in 2026, it's still going to be 500,000 people. And there's a cap. So that is the no change that has now been announced in this immigration targeting numbers. Why is that not a change? Is because they're not increasing the number from 2025 to 2026. It's going to be capped at 500,000. Now, between now and then, things could change. But for now, those are the projections there. It's kind of like up and then level. Is this a result or a response to the housing crisis? Is this a response to the looming recession? We don't know. We know that right now, the atmosphere is not really pro-immigrants because of the housing crisis. And it's unfairly so, because they're saying that, okay, the housing crisis is caused by the immigrants, but this is something that has been building up over time, that has been happening before the increase of immigration targets. And not only that, there's no one sector, there's no one place to put the blame on what's causing this housing crisis. But we don't know why they kept this number the same, but it could be a mixture of things. Recession, housing crisis, Canadians blaming immigrants that we're taking all the houses. Who knows? Now, 500,000 people is still quite a lot of people. But one thing that this no change should bring your attention to is within that 500,000 quota, there are sub-quotas for all of the immigration programs. And I think that a lot of people underestimate or don't pay enough attention to the quotas that are within that big quota, because it's not 500,000 people in the whole world total. It's 500,000 people broken down based on different economic programs. So it's 500,000 people, but then X amount is going to be through the Atlantic Immigration Program. X amount are refugees. X amount are parents and grandparents. X amount are spouses or children as part of the family reunification program. And we are going to look at the numbers here, but I think that this should be a little bit of a fire under your butt if, one, you are trying to pursue a particular program, and two, to realize that there are many of us who have come through this system through a certain route that feels or seems kind of guaranteed, and it's not. Nothing is guaranteed, especially when they have caps on the number of people. And that's the biggest thing that I think people need to bring their awareness to. We're going to look at these numbers. Okay. So here is the 2024-2026 immigration levels plan. Okay. 2024, the target is about 485,000, and they have a high range and a low range, and that's for all of the years. High range and low range. The high range being about 50,000 more than the 500,000. So we're seeing that there's some give and take, and there's some ability to increase. Now, here's where I'm talking about the quota within the quota. Okay, so you have the 485,000 target, but then you have quite a number of people coming from French-speaking permanent resident admissions outside of Quebec. And this is one thing that they for sure changed between now and the last time they made an announcement. And this announcement is not anything new, guys. Nothing to be afraid of necessarily. At the end of the year, they always update their immigration targets. But now they are putting priority on French speaking and building the French speaking immigrant community outside of Quebec, which is probably not a good thing for Quebec. I'm not gonna lie. And Quebec is not necessarily putting themselves in a good standing with this whole French speaking thing, because Quebec also announced that they will be putting a measure in place, or they may be putting a measure in place, where all work permit holders have to take a new French test or another French test to retest their French skills after 3 years when they're trying to renew their work permits. That to me is shooting yourself in the foot, Quebec. I'm not gonna lie. More people will be less inclined to go to Quebec if French is not their first language, or if they don't necessarily want to have to deal with that when they're renewing their work permit. People would probably just leave Quebec. Now, I know that there's probably rules around the fact that maybe Quebec helped them to come here, so their work permit may not work outside of Quebec. There's different things that they're going to have to think about, but people are going to start thinking about it before they even go to Quebec. And you guys have a labor shortage that you're trying to fill. You're trying to fill it with immigrants. If an immigrant is there on a temporary basis, they are contributing, they are getting through with whatever level of French they have. Why are you retesting them? And maybe I'm like too millennial or too worldly to understand what this thing is that they're trying to preserve the French language so much so that it feels so forceful, and it feels really unnecessary. If there is something happening where the first language being French is sort of evolving and it's becoming more Englishy French, what's the big deal? Honestly, what's the big deal? Like, you're holding on to, I get it, this culture and patriotism, and maybe I'm just not patriotic enough to get it. But I think that if a shift is happening and the French language is not dying out, okay, it's just evolving into Englishy French, or something that people prefer, I feel it feels forceful. And I know that there's probably a lot of people in Quebec that won't agree with me. I get it. But the country that you're in is predominantly English speaking. Okay, sorry. That's just my 2 cents. Anyways, they are increasing the quota here. They're obviously showing a line item for itself for French-speaking permanent residents outside of Quebec, which is a good little number there, which is more than some other immigration programs that we're going to see when we go down the list here. So that's pretty cool. Now, federal skilled or high-skilled, federal high-skilled workers, this is part of like the express entry quota, right? And if you think about it, there are at least 800,000 at the end of 2022, end of last year, there were 800,000 open study permits, or international students that are here on study permits. 800,000 is more than 485,000. In fact, 800,000 is more than 500,000. I'm just going to let that sink in for a second. I'm not going to talk about it right now because I'm going to play something that Mark Miller said shortly that really stuck out to me about this whole international student thing. Okay? So, federal high skilled, the quota, the cap is there. That's the quota that they're going to try to meet. And this is all express entry people. And in the whole world, 110,000 people is not a lot of people. Okay? Federal business class. And then now, here's where we get super interesting. So there's economic pilot programs right now that we know of, right? So we know about the caregiver program, pilot program. We know about the agri-food pilot, the rural and northern immigration pilot, and the economic mobility pathway, which is for refugees. The total number of people for all these programs is just 10,875. And we know that the caregiver is capped at about 2,700. And if you kind of divide it up and do the math, there's probably a little bit over 2,000 for each of these streams, which is not a lot of people. And I don't think that is something that people take into consideration when they think about some of these economic programs. There are limits, there are caps. And for some of them, we saw last year where the caregiver cap was met on the 1st of January. Just saying. Okay. Then now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Atlantic Immigration Program, 6,500 people. Now, there was always a cap on this program. I don't think it is spoken about often enough. So, this no change, and also them announcing these numbers is something for you guys to have a look at to see which program are you targeting, which immigration program are you targeting, and if you're planning ahead, does it make sense for you to be targeting that in whatever given year? Now, as the years go by, they're going to increase, like the Atlantic immigration quota, for example, and this quota. So they're going to go up by about 4,000 here. They're going to go up by 2,000 here. Still not a lot of people. But if you're planning your immigration route and planning to target a specific program, think about these numbers. And if you're working with an immigration consultant or a professional, they will help you, or they should be thinking about that as well, and they'll help you to do that, right? So here are those numbers there. They become less significant unless you're trying to get your spouse or partner here, or your parent and grandparent. And even the parent and grandparent is bigger than the numbers that they're sending to Atlantic Canada, which is weird for me because the parents and grandparents are close to retirement. So I don't really get it. But those are the numbers there. Here we have some for people that are protected people and refugees and such. And those are the numbers there. Now, so back to the international student thing. Now, when you think about it, at the end of 2022, there were 800,000 open study permits, right? So those are people who are here, 800,000 people that were in Canada on a study permit as an international student, 800,000, who I'm assuming intend to pursue permanent residency. Maybe not all of them, but maybe like most of them. Right? Because a lot of people, the only reason they come to school in Canada is for the promise of permanent residency. But here is what Honorable Mark Miller said that I think people need to take seriously.
Some may read into some of these announcements that the government wants to start to curb the trend toward two-step immigration, given the number of temporary foreign workers that come here and then apply for permanent residency. Is that your intention whatsoever?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that as a sort of a principled stated intention. It is clear that in some of the schemes that we are hearing from people that are entertaining false hope in some countries, that you come to Canada on a temporary basis, roll the dice, and perhaps you become Canadian. We have to be a little more clear that saying, for example, if you're an international student, you're there to study, does not necessarily guarantee you a path to permanent residency, a job, or Canadian citizenship. Now, the complete reverse of that argument is not necessarily true as well. I mean, the reality is we aren't here simply to get some 40,000 a year from people and see them fritter away and contribute their talents elsewhere. So if there's a market logic to keeping people, that should certainly be entertained and encouraged. But again, on the margins, there's been some abuse on that, and it's something we're trying to stem. It's going to require more than me. It's going to require provinces, territories, and the institutions involved to do this in a way that we get it right. I got to go.
Thank you so much. Now, this isn't a change, okay? What he said isn't something that has changed or is changing. I think it is just kind of making clear or being very straightforward about something that has probably been, like you said, abused for however long, with people saying, hey, if you go to school, you're guaranteed permanent residency. You're not, right? It is a more guaranteed route than other routes. It is a more seamless route than other routes, provided you check all the boxes and meet all the requirements. However, it is no guarantee, especially since there are quotas and caps that are not new. There were always quotas and caps, but now it's kind of like even more, it's highlighted more when they say, well, 800,000 study permits were active last year. And the pathway for all of them to try to convert to permanent residency, it doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. 800,000 is more than 485,000. And that 485,000, within that, there's only so many spaces for international students who are trying to convert, because international students are not part of the parent and grandparent sponsorship program. They're not a part of the spousal sponsorship or children's sponsorship. They're not a part of the refugees. They're not a part of, well, they could be a part of the French, I suppose. They're not a part of the caregiver program. They could be, but usually not. So things are not really adding up there. So it's good to have like a backup plan. Not necessarily that you shouldn't study, but if you're studying, have more than one option through to permanent residency, and make sure you get proper like direction and advice. I know somebody right now who is in Canada, came to Canada as an international student on the hopes and not promise, I don't know if he was promised, but on the hopes that he would be able to convert. And he doesn't have enough points for express entry right now. He does not have enough points. And he is not on a 1-year work permit or a 1-year program. Okay? So, just saying. And in these announcements over the last couple of days, they've also highlighted the fact that they are, really trying to target where there are labor shortages. And I've said this in my last express entry video, that the Canadian immigration system and you coming to Canada is more about what you can do for Canada and less about what Canada can do for you. Yes, you will benefit from what Canada has to offer as a byproduct of immigration, but it is not the first priority. Canada, even when Canada said, you know what, international students, you can work for 40 hours. No. So it used to be 20 hours max. Now you can work full-time 40 hours. You think it's because they were like, you know what, international students need some, ways to make more money so that they can, pay their school fees? No. It's because they realize that international students can help with the labor shortage. So they increased the allowance for work. No, they don't want it to interfere with their studies. So it was a temporary measure that they are going to assess and see if it worked. If it doesn't work, they're going to take it away. But the primary reason was because they had a labor shortage and they realized international students can fill the labor shortage. And so they lifted that ban. You have to realize that it's about Canada. And when they're rolling out these immigration programs and making these announcements, they're going to talk about, well, one, which occupations, which job categories are in demand, which is another thing that you have to think about too with any immigration program you're targeting or anything that you're studying in school. Also, don't just study for something for the sake of immigration because you might have to go home. That's the truth about it. You might not be able to stay, so don't just choose something silly. And this is something that I talk about in my coaching calls with the people who are part of our club. It's just that don't just choose something for the sake of immigration. You're spending your hard-earned money. There is no guarantee. Mark Miller just kind of said, there is no guarantee, guys. But also, you're spending your hard-earned money. Do something that will contribute to your overall goals and not just for immigration, because it may not work out. It could, it may be, and that's the idea. That's why we're here, to help for it to work out. But he just clearly said 0 guarantees. 0. So the sooner you realize that it's about Canada, is the sooner you will be able to say, okay, fine, Canada, what does Canada want? Assess where there are labor shortages, because it's not a secret. Labor shortages are evident in the fact that they're doing specific category-based express entry draws, right? So we know healthcare, we know STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, math, or something. The Francophone, which is the French-speaking people. We know that the transport industry, so like truck drivers, some aircraft special people, and then specific programs, kind of like the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, which is the provincial nominee program for Alberta. is targeting specific industries like healthcare and like technology. And then other programs like the rural and northern, there are some communities that I see where one paused the rural and northern program, then they reopened it in phases based on in-demand careers. In-demand careers. It's important for you to know what your NOC is compared to what Canada wants to. Okay? So that you are showing to Canada, or you're able to show to Canada, that you are part of the solution when they allow you to come here as an immigrant and then allow you to stay as a permanent resident. No, don't change your whole life because of what Canada needs. I'm not saying to do that. But yes. People who are French speaking, they have an advantage, and we can see here. And French speaking is not just because you can speak French. And then we've learned too from another member in our club that just because you did the French test doesn't automatically make you bilingual unless you get a certain score. So you have to get a certain score across all 4: speaking, listening, reading, writing, certain score, to then have on your profile, check, you are bilingual, legally bilingual. Now, here's one thing that I found is probably lacking in their announcements. It's that one, they said that they are going to have a more holistic, integrated system that includes the immigration levels and the immigration parts and the infrastructure and housing and healthcare. But it didn't say what. What are they going to do? Like, really, what are they going to do? What's the plan? There's no like, well, this is how we're going to do that. Because housing, the availability of housing is one thing. The cost of housing, like if you've watched my cost of living series, we just did 3 apartment tours. And I know that you think that we probably went to bougie places or bougie areas, and so the rent is that much. No, the rent is just that much for real. We went to a house. We know what it costs to rent a room in the house, the cost to rent the whole house. We went to an apartment and went to a basement. And all of them were over $2,000. The room in the house was $1,700, which is not shy of $2,000, really. And that's a room in a house. Right? And it's ridiculous. When I moved to Canada, rent was $600. That was 10 years ago. And even that was probably high, you know? So I don't know what their plan is. And if you think about it, right, like if the population increases by 500,000 because 500,000 babies were born, it's different than 500,000 grown adults who need cars, who need bank accounts, who need a house to live in, who need healthcare, who need groceries, like in the span of 1 year, which is different than like natural population increase. How do we keep up? How do they plan to keep up is not something that I saw as here's how we're going to do it. It was kind of like, we plan on doing it. Yeah. Which I would hope that would have been part of the target. Like when you think about these numbers, they have to think holistically, right? I think. Anyways. One last thing that I want to bring up is that they plan to have an advisory board of newcomers to help guide policy development and improvements on service delivery. So newcomers get to, I guess, contribute to how things are done because they're going to put together an advisory board, which is interesting, which is very, pick me. Or maybe I'm too controversial. I don't know. But that sounds good. And all in all, nothing much changed. However, no change is a change. Immigration numbers are leveling off. Also, let this be a light bulb for you who are sitting in your home countries, or if you're in Canada trying to transition into some sort of a permanent or temporary resident thing as a worker or whatever. Think about the quotas. Think about them seriously. And think about them when you're thinking about a program to pursue to know that, okay, there are limitations in terms of the number of people they will accept per year for all of these. It doesn't mean you mustn't pursue them. It doesn't mean that. But it means that you probably need to act swiftly before quotas get filled up, and like have a plan, an execution plan going forward. Okay. If you're watching me for the first time, I am Christina. I am a Canadian immigration coach. I am a 10-year Canadian immigrant coming next year. And I came as an international student. Then I worked. Then I became a permanent resident. Then I did citizenship. And that happened all in the span of 5 years. Our partnering immigration consultant is MacBean Immigration Consulting, Inc., who can definitely help you to figure out what is right for you and which path you should be pursuing. And you can join us inside the Canadian Dreamers Club, where you have access to me, where I will have group coaching sessions, where I will help to inform you on what I know about the Canadian immigration system. I will help to answer your questions, and I will help to connect you with the right professional based on what you are trying to do. So are you trying to get to school? Are you trying to work? Whatever the situation is, I will navigate you and put you in the right place with the right people and point you in the right direction. So all the links, the link to this thing that I spoke about just now, the link to the club, everything is in the description box below. I appreciate you for taking the time out to watch this video. If this was helpful to you, please give it a thumbs up. Please share this video with anybody who you think it may be helpful to. Hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, because you will get more helpful videos like this on this channel. I appreciate you. I will see you in the next video.